Welcome to the story of one of the most unique industries in Boulder County. Did you know that, in addition to coal production, 250 tons of iron were produced at a blast furnace at Marshall, just south of Boulder? Bill Reich and I worked out the history of the furnace and actually found parts and pieces of it still in place. A real surprise surfaced at Denver Public Library when we found the furnace historical files there. Marshall is a few miles southeast of Boulder, located just east of the intersection of Route 93 and El Dorado Springs Road. It has had many names through time: Marshall, Langford, and Gorham. The first name was Kitchen's Bank for the coal mine, and then came Belmont, or Pretty Mountain. This map, one of the earliest ever made of Colorado's topography, came from the 1866 Belmont Iron and Coal Company prospectus. It shows Profile Butte. Where was Profile Butte? You'll see soon. On this map, note the Central Pacific Railroad that came through Denver to LaPorte, where it tied into the Union Pacific Railroad. All of those were the dream children of Denver promoters and the mapmaker. This enlargement of the coal and iron ore portion of the map shows other interesting local features. Valmont Dike, northeast of Marshall near Fillmore's. A ditch coming off South Boulder Creek to Marshall and Company's furnace at Belmont. Note it's spelled differently, and a number of buildings there and the mention of coal deposits. There was a road to the furnace from Profile Butte, where there was also a coal bank. The trail going north of 128 near Route 93 follows that old road path. A grist mill was located along South Boulder Creek, west of Marshall, and a sawmill was up Coal Creek. The road to Denver says 15 miles, but that road followed a circuitous route that went north of Golden. According to a Boulder Camera newspaper caption, this might be the earliest picture of Boulder. It's dated 1865. It was taken from a point near Marine Street, named for Marion S. Smith, and 12th, which is now Broadway, bounded by a fence in this photo. If there was a bridge across Boulder Creek, it was very crude. The two-story building on Pearl Street was the first of bricks constructed in Boulder by A.J. Mackey. It is now owned by Ralph B. Potter. The high school athletic field area is in the foreground. Joseph Marshall came to Denver in its earliest days. He came through St. Paul, Minnesota, from a line of iron makers in New York State. His sister was married to Augustine Langford, and Augustine's brother, Nathaniel, eventually was appointed the first superintendent of Yellowstone National Park. Early in 1860, the Langfords and Marshall established an iron foundry in Denver. From iron ore harvested near Marshall in 1861, their iron found its way into the first and only cannon made in Denver. Still an artifact at the Colorado History Museum, this little guy was fired every 4th of July for 15 years until 1876. This painting, made in 1869 by Henry W. Elliott, the artist for the Hayden Geological Survey, shows Pine Ridge at Marshall clearly, and in the valley, the iron furnace. The road coming down from South Boulder Creek is evident, and there is a wagon tipple near the foreground to load coal from the mine on the upper right. The dashed line is the path along which Hayden measured his geological section. He actually went underground and measured. The inset shows an enlargement of the iron furnace. This is Hayden's measured section, along with sketches of some of the fossil plants found through the years in the rock layers near Marshall, in what is now called the Laramie Formation. Note that Hayden recorded the dip of the beds and showed the presence of a fault through the section. He also listed the layers that had excellent iron ore and coal. But iron, when you hike at Marshall, did you ever notice the iron concretions laying on the ground around Marshall, south to Coal Creek? It's hard for us in today's age of large magnetite deposits in the state to imagine using these low-grade concretions for iron, but the same type of rocks provided most of the iron for the old iron furnaces in the east. How did the iron form? Did it come in on water and get stabilized by algae on the lake shore during deposition? Or did it form like iron globs do today in the swamps of Maryland? The sediments don't preserve evidence of swamp conditions, except in the isolated random thin coal beds. One geologist in Pennsylvania showed a correlation between the iron furnaces there and the faults that run northeast-southwest through the Appalachian Mountains. She proposed that the iron came in on groundwater flowing along the faults. Certainly the iron-coated ripple marks on the fault surface at Marshall lends credence to that theory. The area around Marshall is fraught with faults. The Fox, the Peerless, the Gorham, the South Gorham, and Pine Ridge, to name a few. This geologic map shows the main faults and how they have offset the coal beds. So perhaps the groundwater in the faults did transport the iron to near the surface where iron-fixing algae might have collected it. But 500 tons of iron, there certainly isn't that quantity in the Marshall area today. This map was the wonderful surprise in the Belmont Iron and Coal Company perspective. This is the first geological map of anywhere in Colorado. It predated Hayden's visits that showed the iron beds and coal layers at Coal Creek. The map maker used the correct section numbers, so we can drop this map right over a modern topographic map of the Coal Creek area to see where the Belmont Company harvested their iron right off the surface. If you go along 128 east of Rock Creek Valley, you can find small concretions on top of the Pierre Shale outcrop. The iron here shown occurred in bigger concretions on the surface of the Laramie beds. Some things to note about this map: the road to the furnace, and a cabin to the north along the road, cabins at Profile Butte, the road to Golden City, and the road to the west, to the sawmill along Coal Creek. The road to Denver shown here is a more direct route than the previous insert, following a route similar to our Route 128. The cross-section of the rock layers is the earliest ever made of any rock layers anywhere in Colorado. The measurements were very accurate, and the tilt of the beds were exactly correct. The fire, clay, and coal were mined there for a very short time. The sketch of Profile Butte is more fanciful, with coal miners and wagons, 2 large buildings, and a distinct outline of the profile. A story accompanies this picture. Before we found the prospectus and the original drawing, many people proposed that this was Dowdy Draw along South Boulder Creek with the Dunn House, and that it was under attack by Indians. Enlarging the painting shows that these fellows are all miners or drivers, no Indians in sight. In 1869, 3 years later, Elliott painted this view of Coal Creek, complete with Frederick Hayden, his boss, a smart move on the part of the artist. Note that there are no buildings. Also notice the geologist heading up the hogback to the old coal workings. That mine was not worked for many years compared to the mines at Marshall. This is Profile Butte today. Looking southwest on a cloudy day, you can see the profile better. I see Abe Lincoln's nose and beard and eyebrow. What do you see? But the iron furnace is the real reason we are here. The McGinn brothers, who lived up the road toward El Dorado Canyon, dug the ditch from South Boulder Creek over to the furnace. The ore was kept in the storage house and taken by cart over the charging bridge, green arrow, to the furnace, red arrow. Power to run the blast bellows came from a water wheel along the ditch, blue arrow. The molten iron was pulled off the bottom of the furnace and poured into pigs in the casting house, dark arrow. Charcoal was the only fuel used in this reducing furnace. The McGinn brothers cut timber from the mouth of El Dorado Canyon to turn into charcoal. Probably that's Frederick Hayden again in Eliot's sketch of the canyon looking east. The cut timber was heated in a pit, thus it was called pit charcoal as opposed to kiln charcoal. The timber in the pit was covered with mud to exclude air. A match fire was placed at the base of the center post to bake out the sap and turn the timber to charcoal. After the burning was complete, the charcoal was dug out and taken by wagon over to the furnace. Probably timber cutting extended all along the Front Range over to Bear Canyon. Also, Cretaceous limestone was mined from Bear Canyon to use as a flux in the furnace. It pulled out the impurities in the iron ore. This is Bill's best guess as to what Marshall's iron furnace looked like. It was a large structure. The rocks would have been mined locally from the Laramie and perhaps the Dakota formations. This representation of an 1860s iron blast furnace back east shows the essential parts. Everything is here. The charging bridge, the furnace, the flume, the water wheel, the bellows, and the pig casting. Compare this diagram with Eliot's drawing of the Belmont furnace. Another representation that shows the essential parts of the Marshall iron furnace: the charging bridge, furnace, flume, water wheel, bellows, casting the pigs, and pulling off the slag. Again, compare this diagram with Eliot's drawing of the Belmont furnace. The Belmont furnace was a cold blast furnace. The air blasted into the bottom. It was not preheated as was done later in Pueblo. The charcoal reduced the raw iron and stripped the oxygen molecules from the iron ore. When the charge reached the Bosch, the molten iron dropped to the bottom of the hearth. There it was drawn off and poured into pigs on the sand floor in the casting house. Slag, impurities, floated on top of the iron and were also drawn off. They were sent to a dump. The furnace location would have been at the yellow pin and circle in the lower left-hand corner of the photo. Obviously, Eliot's painting emphasized Pine Ridge. Perhaps there was less vegetation in 1869. The iron furnace failed to function for very long. The hearth burned out not once, but twice. Within a few years, it was easier to gather scrap metal that had been hauled across the plains and left in the mountains than to harvest the concretions, which eventually played out. When the railroad finally did come to Marshall, it went right through the furnace site. The stones of the furnace were used in the Marshall buildings. The slag ended up as railroad ballast. In 1931, a history of the iron furnace was written up in Colorado Magazine with an oral interview and photo of James McGinn, Jr., the son of James McGinn, the ditch digger, charcoal and limestone provider. This stone wall, partially reset, is all that remains of the furnace south of the main street in Marshall. Do you see the hole of the iron pipe at the left in the photo? That is probably the remains of the air tuyere which blasted the air into the furnace. Be aware that this site is on private property. Thanks for watching. It took us about 3 years to work this history out. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you will go have a blast hiking in the trails around Marshall. Thanks for watching. Bye.